So you've done it. All right, we're live everywhere. Well, welcome everybody to this live stream, exciting live stream with Alex McLean. Hello, Alex.
Hey, JB, how you doing?
I'm great. It's a real pleasure to have you. And it's kind of a series response because last week we had another live coding talk, and probably as a tricky question for you. Could you define easily live coding? I mean, just to prepare everyone's expectation, this conversation with Alex is going to go in a lot of in length into complex topics. But this one, just to ease into the topic, can you describe it, in simple words, what live coding is about?
No, sorry. No, so, yeah, I read something by I think James Baldwin about how if you define things, the kind of human sort of desire to define things seems like it's making things simpler, but actually it tends to throw things into chaos. I think, yeah, and live coding, I suppose, it is about redefining rules while they're followed, but that also counts for the definition of live coding itself. So I think if anyone tries to define exactly what it is, then there'll always be someone who'll immediately come up with a performance which confounds that that definition. But nonetheless, I can try and define it. I think live coding's as I say, about following rules while they're followed, or changing rules while they're followed, rather. So that could be, for example, a system of law has in it rules for how to change itself through a parliament or something like that. And you could say that was live coding, or if you're working with a spreadsheet and editing it, and you change a formula in one part of the spreadsheet and the whole thing updates. That feels like live coding, kind of exploratory work with code. But in terms of as a performance practice, I suppose it is coding live in front of people so they can see that you're coding somehow, usually a projection behind you, and you're typing on your keyboard usually, and they basically see your screen and you're writing code, and what that code is doing is generating something like music, for example. That would be topical for this stream. And so the classic live coding performance would be someone making music or visuals or even choreography while they're writing the code, which is immediately enacted. And so code is then an interface for working with the world, I suppose. It's like an interface for action. But then going further than that, I'd say for me, live coding, you could say just writing a sequence in a computer program like Cubase or something would be live coding, because you have this notation and you're working with it and you can play it more or less. Actually, I haven't used a sequencer in a long time, but I imagine you can work with it while it's playing somehow. And you could say that was live coding, but for me, it needs something a bit more. I think it needs surprise for it to be live coding. I think you need to have the possibility for being surprised by what you're making, because otherwise you'll just have some idea in your head and you're transcribing it, which is a very nice way to work. Like it's how a lot of people make things, and that's all great. But with code, I think you're sort of one step removed from what you're making. So it's not like you're hitting a drum and hearing a sound, which is a wonderful thing. I love playing the drums. I'm not very good. It's more like you're writing quite a long, well, it might be a line of code, and then that is then running in order to create a whole rhythm. So you're further away from the sound because you can't just hit something and hear it. But at the same time, you can work with describing lots of things happening one after another. So you're kind of removed from the sound, but that means you're closer to the composition, you could say. And in that space, when you're working with a composition, that's where the possibility for surprise comes from, because if you're not working with the kind of actual material directly, but in this metamaterial, then if you change one thing, that can have really far-reaching effects beyond your imagination. And that's what live coding is about for me, working with something live, but where you're working with often very simple things, but in combination that create these chaotic systems almost, where you make a small change and then it has far-reaching results. And that doesn't mean it's not deterministic. Computers are always deterministic, they say. But it is unpredictable in the same way as chaotic systems are. So if you make a change, it's going to have a deterministic result, but you don't know what that is until you try it. So for me, live coding is about improvisation with code, where you're kind of working with this notation, which is hopefully confounding your expectations about what you're writing, which means that if you're making music, then probably the most important part of live coding is listening to what you're doing. So you make a change and then listen to it to work out what the meaning is of what you've written. And only once you know what the meaning is, at that point, you know what you've made. So classically, we call this about the relationship between a map and the territory. So I can't remember who said it, but a philosopher said, or was it a physicist? I'm not sure. The map is not the territory. So when you're live coding, you're working with a map, and then the map is generating the territory, which you then can experience in order to read the map that you've written. So you can't read the code until you've actually run it and experienced what it makes.
Well, that's a question we can ask people who are watching on YouTube. If you can find which philosopher said of the map as the territory, the concept.
The map is not the territory.
The map is not the territory. I think it's Deleuze, but I'd love to get some more thoughts from that. And also, if you want to express what live coding is for you in the chat, we'll be reading this and responding to your comments live on YouTube and on Facebook. So don't hesitate to intervene there. So well, thank you for I think I'm going to get unstable. So be ready to improvise, Alex.
No, you seem to be okay so far. Oh, there he goes.
Okay. Okay. Well, so live coding, I mean, for me, I experienced it from outside. I was not inside the live coding movement. I was doing electronic music at the beginning of the early 2000s. And at the same time as you started to do live coding. And for me, it was about people on stage creating that moment and that music, but with cues as how it was being made. And that was very interesting. It became also a cultural movement, and there's plenty of things that you're going to explain how it relates also to you personally. But you were there from the very beginning, and you still continue to do it today. So, yeah, I'd love to hear more about how it started for you.
Yeah, I guess. So I started live coding sometime around between the year 2000 and 2003. It's quite strange to think that some people watching this and live coding won't have been around at that point. So getting pretty old. So yeah, it's kind of it seems there was something in the air. It's like a few people in different parts of the world started exploring this idea of making. It started mainly with making music using code, but it seemed like a non-obvious thing at the time. And it's interesting to realize why people. I suppose there were people always doing live coding, but there was never a community around it until around the year 2000. But yeah, there's something in the air around that time. I guess Julian Rohrhuber says that it's to do with like a mixture of expertise and ignorance coming together. So in his case, Julian, he he came up with the first live coding system in SuperCollider, called the just-in-time library. And for him, it was sort of a mistake, actually. He saw someone showed him SuperCollider. He was really intrigued, but he didn't have a computer, so he was just reading the manual and writing SuperCollider code in a notebook to try and understand this system. Around the year 2000, it was pretty rare to actually have a sort of laptop. And there's something in the manual for SuperCollider that he misunderstood. It's something about how you could compile text while it was running, and he thought you'd be able to edit a bit of code and hear the change in the sound, which wasn't what it actually meant. So he misunderstood what SuperCollider could do, and then when he eventually managed to get SuperCollider running on his own computer, he was really disappointed that you couldn't just do this exploratory work. And so he made a system just-in-time library for doing that. I think that's really nice, the idea of live coding being a mistake. And people like Shelley Knotts always talk about live coding being about embracing error, sort of having the possibility for failure and working that into an improvised performance. But yeah, I guess I can show a couple of images from that time. Let's see if yes. So this is I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's Julian there with Renata Weiser, and together they had the first live coding meeting called Changing Grammars, which was in Hamburg. And there was Nick Collins and Frederick Oliferson and people like that. And that's the first time we I was at a meeting where we were discussing live coding together, and Go Wang had a sort of remote participation somewhere. He was the person behind Chuck. So yeah, and that was in, I think, 2003, 2004, and that's when the Toplap organization was formed. So yeah, somehow these different people like David Ogborn as well, all kind of exploring live coding, and somehow we found each other, and at this meeting, the Toplap organization was formed. I've got an excerpt from the Toplap manifesto. We were into manifestos then. One was obscurantism is dangerous, show us your screens. Another is live coding is not about tools, algorithms are thoughts, chainsaws are tools. So we're talking quite a lot. I mean, Julian was and Renata were, I think, doing a media, I'm not sure what their course was called, but they were master's students, and so they were sort of thinking about this in quite philosophical terms. And this sort of mixture of media philosophy and computer geeks and musicians somehow came together into this interdisciplinary scene mainly in Europe, but also in the States. But yeah, going back a bit, I started with another manifesto in the year 2000 with my friend Adrian Ward. We had a band called SLUB, and our idea was to make music only using our own software. We didn't want to use anyone else's, and to embrace generative music, so we could turn up with our laptops and make music using our algorithms and try and get people to dance. And we made a manifesto ourselves, which you can look up online if you're interested. And later, Dave Griffiths joined us, who's at the time more of a visualist, I guess. He made this Fluxus system. So there's Aid with his map MSG system, which is a pen on Mac's MSP. There's a lot of pens in the world of live coding and algorave. And there I am writing Perl scripts. So I'd write these Perl scripts in order to generate music. But after this Hamburg visit, I realized that I really needed to edit the code live. Aid was already doing that with his systems like Mac's Map MSG and Pure Events. But yeah, so we came together, and later on, Alexandra Cardenas, who's in the chat, I think, joined us to as another SLUB member. But this was a really kind of influential collaboration for me. Adrian had a background in in Media Lab Arts, and was making this amazing software. Like there was a parody of Adobe Illustrator that would that he called, what was it? I can't remember. But he was making this weird software art that kind of confounded expectations and sort of played with the idea of programmers being creative. And based on his work, it was sort of a natural step to bring the creative programmer on stage, because at the time the idea of a programmer being creative was quite funny. Geek was something that you laughed at, and the idea of writing code as being creative was just not taken seriously at all. Since then, creative coding's, of course, a whole scene of its own. But yeah, so I guess SLUB was where it started for me. Yeah, kind of everything sort of came from there. Don't know if
So
that,
yeah, no, but there was a context as well. I mean, in 2000, you were probably like 12 or 13, no? Or were you a student or?
in 2000 I was 25.
Okay. Well, you don't show your age.
No.
So at this point, you were at university, or were you an artist full time?
Yeah, so I started. I kind of managed to scrape through a computing degree at that point. I was in London working during the first internet boom, working for a company called State 51. So in the music industry, in the sort of independent music industry, and yeah, but gradually got more interested in live coding until that was kind of. I wanted to understand what live coding was and what programming was. It's kind of this strange feeling of programming. It's a really strange thing, sort of writing this code and not knowing where it's come from. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but programming is such a weird thing, because you sort of make these really complex structures. All programmers do, and it's all based on this idea you have, but somehow it just comes out onto the page, and you don't really have any insight into how that happens. It just feels like magic. It's like I suppose it's like any creative thing, really. You feel like you can make something that's beyond your imagination, and it just comes out, and there's you can't reflect on how that's happened, and so it kind of troubled me, actually, and that's when I sort of went back to university, managed to get a place on the masters, and then eventually continued on to a PhD in Goldsmith's computing department, which is of course very musically focused. Had a fantastic time, very interdisciplinary experience.
Great. Well, so among all this, you work, and then you do your masters. You also continue to work as an artist, but then also there's something else that starts. I mean, like it starts to catch. The scene for live coding starts to grow, and that's when you and other folks start Algorave. Can you
Yeah.
describe what the intention is there? What is this all about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's, as a live coder, we were kind of between worlds. Like, we weren't really taken seriously in computer science. We weren't really taken seriously in the music industry. We just had these really small events, which was great fun. But yeah, we couldn't really get involved with being signed to a label or anything, or being put on in a big club. So yeah, and we weren't taken seriously in the academic music world either. Like, the idea of making academic music that you could dance to wasn't really a thing back then. So yeah, we're kind of, it's not as if it sort of caught on. It's sort of this really fun time where we were just exploring this really stupid idea of writing code to make music, and it felt like there was something interesting about it that sort of compelled you to carry on. But it's not like suddenly we're making fantastic music. For me, it took quite a long time to be able to do that. Just an idea. But at one point I was trying, and I was really enjoying making these sort of experimental events. Like making events has always been part of my creative practice, really. Like, for example, the Placard Headphone Festival. I think I've got an image I can share. I might have shared the wrong window there. Very professional. But yeah, let's see if I can get the right one this time. Yeah. So this was an event where it was the Placard Headphone Festival was started in Paris and then Japan. And it was this headphone where you just have these really long headphone festivals that might last days. In London, we had it just for, I think, 14 hours, but with one performance every 20 minutes. So I had to make this thing in the bottom right where it would switch between different mixes at the right time so people could play at different times. So it's really into sort of making these experimental events where you wouldn't know exactly what would happen. Like Leafcat John, who's there with his shirt off, showed up and just used the sound of the room, which you could do on headphones. And people are doing all these experimental things. This is the kind of thing I love to do, sort of create these situations where you don't know what's going to happen. You just create a space and you don't even know if anyone's going to show up. But yeah, usually they do if there's something interesting about it. And then it's just so nice. It's one of the best things in the world when an event works and just does something. People just turn it into something. And so that's kind of what I was always compelled to do. And with Algorave, it kind of came out of a conversation with me and Nick Collins about the idea of whether you could invent a genre. How could you do that? Could you make an artificial genre by sort of planning it ahead? Usually genres are sort of defined by journalists, but as an artist, could you get a crew together and sort of decide on a particular kind of meter that you wanted to explore, on a particular kind of sound, and come up with a nice name for it? And I think it came out of that. Like, how is the idea of how to sort of
Okay, so it looks like we have lost Alex. I'm sorry about this. Alex was talking about the live scene that started to emerge, the experimental live scene using headphones and leading to.
Hello. Am I live now? Can you hear me?
Alex is now back. I don't know if I was talking to myself for a second here, but we're all back.
And can you hear my voice?
I can, and I think everybody else
Okay.
can too.
Yeah, so I was going on and on about the Placard Headphone Festival. I don't know if you caught me talk about Algorave after that.
I don't think we went that far.
Okay. Okay, so Laura says that she can hear us both. That's good. Okay.
Thank you for that.
So yeah, I was basically going on about how it's really nice creating something, an event, not knowing what's going to happen, just setting up the parameters, like saying, I'm going to make this thing where everyone's going to listen on headphones. There's going to be a robot that's switching between the performers and see what happens. And then the people come and bring meaning to it.
And Ryan actually reminds me, and thank you, Ryan, on YouTube, that you cut off when you were talking about defining a genre, and I don't think you finished that.
Okay, yeah.
You
So
didn't conclude on that, and that's quite fascinating.
we were talking about, me and Nick Collins, sort of how, well, this is just like a really short email exchange, but yeah, it was about trying to think about how you could define a genre, how you could sort of just work out what kind of sound, what kind of meters you'd use, and for live coders, we could maybe make a library for it. I don't know. It didn't really go anywhere, but I was always thinking about it. How can we create a name for something like an activity? Because live coding itself, it isn't a genre. It's just a set of tools, or a weird definition like I gave earlier. How can we actually turn it into a more of a movement? And eventually came up with Algorave, which still isn't a genre, but it is sort of the idea of people dancing to algorithms, not just live coding, but any kind of algorithmic music is all fine as long as you can kind of see what's going on. And that really really did the trick. I think coming up with a name where you can't really take yourself too seriously with it. Like you can't like say, hey, I'm going to perform at an Algorave and like pretend you're a rock star or something. I think that's pretty important. But it's also, there's something very serious about it. It's serious fun. It's about actually making music that people can dance to. If you got that video clip with it's quite short, the CCAI one. Find my notes. Yeah, CCIA time X hello code. Might give an impression about what an Algorave's like. So this is Corsica Studios, one of my favorite Algoraves ever. Algorave Elephant, we called it, with Corsica being Elephant and Castle in London. And we made this two-roomed Algorave together with Harry Murdoch and his crew.
All right, so this is a very short video. This is gonna work.
Yeah, it's quite a short clip, but gives you a sort of a taste about what goes on. That was me and my friend Sam, and also Antonio making visuals, which unfortunately you can't see in that clip, but they were amazing. So the idea of an Algorave being that where people dance to algorithms, it's kind of interesting idea. I think the idea that it's all very human focused. You can see the person who's making it, you can see the code that they're making, but with it being a rave, what's really important is the music and dancing and seeing each other enjoying it. It's just to perform an Algorave when it goes well is just the best feeling. I think the feeling of sort of being completely absorbed in this text, this code, while at the same time having the real physical feedback of people dancing and the sound system is I really recommend it.
Well, I'm sure that people will want now to have the full experience if they've not lived it before. So stay tuned, because a live demo is coming, and maybe you will also have this feeling from home. So Algorave, so a combination of algorithm and rave. I mean, the counterculture of techno in the late 80s and 90s. So it's like a clash of two worlds, like the nerds from computer science and then the I guess the punks of the ravers. I don't know how you call it. I don't dangerous territory here. If we're classifying people, I apologize if I hurt any feelings. But moving on, like so Algorave is started. There's a community growing. So how did it work out? Like it needed some work. I mean, both on the organization level, finding enough people who knew SuperCollider or other live coding tools, to then show up. And it's not like now where everything happens online. It's like it's physical.
Yeah, I guess it was hardware. And the first one was part of the SuperCollider symposium, or it was like a preview event for that. And then and that was quite nice. I remember it as being quite chaotic. But it was in this little warehouse in London, went well. And I guess it was pretty small. And I think in general, the Algraves I've made have been pretty small for sort of 50 people, but in a small room with a big sound system in the dark. It's sort of ideal for me. And yeah, early on we had one on the Stubnitz, MS Stubnitz, when that was visiting London. So this is like an art ship that travels around. I think it's in Hamburg now, actually, but amazing ship with incredible sound system in the hull. And yeah, it was great to get more people at those. Yeah, that was amazing. But it was interesting seeing, like, as I say, organizing these events, you don't really know what's going to happen, but somehow the people who turn up sort of bring the meaning to it. It was nice. My friend Dave Griffiths overheard someone at the I think it was the second ever Algrave in London, and overheard someone say something like, "Oh, I'm not really an expert on Algrave. I've only been to 2 of them." And it was sort of only the second one we'd ever had in London, and I think there might have been a couple of other in around. But yeah, sort of the idea of they were actually knew more about Algrave than anyone else because they'd already been to 2. But yeah, I suppose there was always, it seems like it's quite an easy thing to write article about. So hopefully I'll be able to share another image. Let me try, see if I can share the right one this time. Yeah. So the first live coding formed in the year 2000, and then in the year 2006, that would be before Algrave was actually coined. But we had this Real DJs Code Live article. And then in 2013, Hacking meets Clubbing with the Algrave. And in 2019, DJs of the future don't spin records, they write code. So it seems like every 6 years there's an article in Wired magazine. The next one's probably going to be in 2025, saying that live coding is the future and it's going to replace DJing, which really kind of misses the point. The actual articles were nice. It's always I think someone else writes the headlines. It's always clickbait, but it's kind of interesting that Algrave's put forward as the future, whereas writing code is actually quite an old-fashioned way of using a computer, and live coders are totally not about replacing DJs. Turntablists are incredible, and I've had the best nights listening to the best DJs, and there's no way I'd want them to stop. Live coding is much more like playing an instrument than it is selecting anyway. So yeah, it's not quite the right comparison. But yeah, I guess a mixture of just slowly building up a scene. Like in Sheffield, I've had loads of Algraves, and I guess there's people who come along regularly, and being supported by festivals like Blue Dot, and in Sheffield, No Bounds Festival, and record labels like Computer Club. Just slowly managing, and or what's the other one? Conditional Records. So the idea of live coding gradually eking out into the outside world. It's been fun to watch.
And how did collaboration work? Like collaboration either with other live coders or with acoustic or amplified instruments?
Yeah, it's nice. It's sort of when, because I guess there's a lot of criticisms about live coding, which I've certainly thought about, that it can be slow to it's quite slow way of making music. Like to type something takes a while, depending on the language you're using. So for me, working in collaboration with instrumental musicians is really important way to develop software, to sort of work out what I've made and how it works in that live situation. I think there's a video of me and Matthew Yeking as Canute. It might be a nice one to show quickly. This was in an Algorave in Karlsruhe in Germany, hosted by Benoit and the Mandelbrots. And Matthew is a long-time SuperCollider user and live coder, and but he was playing the drums. This was one of my favorite performances, actually. Just felt like we were really playing together. I think we had fantastic monitoring. I could see each other. So rare to actually get time to sound check properly and get decent sound. I just set the stage up perfectly. So important. And it just felt like we were really playing together. We could just sense when it was time to make a change and break down. Wow, it goes on. Yeah, but you can hear we both stopped at the same time. Then it's quite nice, and that's really important for me. And actually performing with the percussionists, actually another one, Alex Garagocci, a sort of jazz improviser, was really what made me want to develop my own language. So before I was using Perl, but I realized I really wanted to make something that was much more immediate, that was a sort of domain-specific language just for making patterns as fast as possible. So I could kind of respond to my friend Alex within a few seconds rather than a few minutes, which is sort of how long it would take me to make some code in Perl. So yeah, maybe we should move on to talking about Tidal a bit. Otherwise, I'll just
That's a great idea. Yeah. And I'd love to also engage, with people who are watching us on YouTube and Facebook. If you have collaborated as live coders or as a musician, and if you want to share your experience, that'd be great. And also don't hesitate to ask questions, because Alex will monitor them, and we will give you the floor later. So TidalCycles. So you created TidalCycles on top of SuperCollider. I'm going to let you prepare while I present a little bit. So I installed it as well myself, and there's also McGill University that has made a very easy way for anyone to use mini Tidal on the web, and we can probably find the address, and I will put it on the chat. We also have at the Music Hack Space had a fantastic TidalCycles workshop. We had a few actually. The latest one with Melody Loveless, and it's free, and you can register for it. And there's a ton of video and code examples to get you started with TidalCycles on our website. And there's also instructions for how to install Tidal and instructions to use the McGill University online coding. And I think Alex might be ready. Oh, but we can't hear you now. So we can hear the sound from TidalCycles, but we can't hear your voice. So I'm going to pretend I'm Alex. So I did just type sound quote BD quote, and you were able to hear the sound of a bass drum. And I'm going to figure out now the sound. I have an idea. I'm going to figure out what the sound routing should be. So let me just check in Jack.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah,
great. I don't have to be Alex anymore.
Might cut out then, but I've managed to reroute it in Jack, as I said in my slightly changed accent.
Yeah.
So you can hear that then, because that's strange because I
Yes.
can't. So I'll need to route that back to there as well. Okay. Good. So that's a bass drum.
Okay, that's a bass
Yeah.
drum.
So it's a Tidal. Is a project. I can't. It's probably about 10 years old or something, maybe a bit longer. I can't remember. I started it while doing my doctoral training in goldsmiths that I mentioned earlier. It's inspired by a few different things. There's an amazing system called the Bowl Processor by Bernard Bell, which is based on Indian classical music. So the MIDI notation is all based on that. So that's what you see in between the double quotes. I'll go into that shortly. And then also inspired by the idea of algorithmic pattern in textiles, and also Laurie Spiegel wrote a nice essay about manipulations of musical pattern, a really nice essay about transforming pattern, about pattern not as being like a sequence like we talk about in music, but a pattern as being as a manipulation. So Tidal's about basically sequencing, borrowed from the Bowl processor from Indian classical music, which is about polymetric expressions, and pattern manipulation, which is inspired by the idea of pattern in textiles as a transformation, and also inspired by things like sound poetry and all kinds of influences. But yeah, feel free to ask questions about any of this, by the way, as JB says. So let's start with the MIDI notations. So recently there was a nice Music Hackspace session about a new system called NestStep, which is a fantastic name short for nested tuples. And Tidal, this MIDI notation based on the Bowl processor is sort of similar to that, I suppose. The idea of being able to represent cycles within cycles, so that you can have a quite free idea of meter. So, but the simplest thing you can do is just put the sounds in here. I'm using this experimental editor, which sort of flashes when a particular element is active. So the first thing to say is that, sorry, I've just muted it, so that's why I'm not hearing it. But the first thing to say is that there's no concept of beat in Tidal. This comes from the Bowl processor in Indian classical music, the idea that the sort of fundamental unit isn't the beat, it's the cycle, it's the metrical cycle. So for that reason, if I put more sounds in here, it'll go faster. So there's like a fixed tempo, which is expressed in cycles per second, and that says how long a cycle is, and doesn't matter how many things I put in there, that cycle will always be locked to that. So if I have another thing going, like what shall I do? Let's have CPU record samples, thanks. CPU records, and I'll pattern the samples within that sample pack. So if I have that going with 5 things, and then have this going on top, I mean, 8 against 5 is quite hard to listen to, sort of pass, unless you're a percussionist. But both those cycles are locked to the same cycles per second, and I can change that with. So CPS is sort of one number which I can change for everything. So that's quite a strange thing. The idea that the beat isn't fixed. It's just given by the number of things in the cycle. The cycle is the sort of unit. And you can sort of break this down into subcycles. So if we just have 4 things, I'll put a rest in here. I can break this down into so I can resist adding a bit of distortion there. Yes, I hope you can still hear me. This is a subcycle, so there's 2 things in there, and so I can do things like so I could also break down this into even smaller or alternatively I could have something like this. So now I've got 3 things in the first half and 4 things in the second half, each in their own subcycle. So it's really flexible. So basically time is all about ratios, and things divide up perfectly. So that's sort of the mini notation. There's a lot more you can do in there, but that's sort of the basics. As I said, yeah, that'll do for now, maybe. But then there's the transformations. Like one simple thing to do is to make this faster. One thing I could do is sort of make that conditional, so say every 3 cycles, make it twice as fast. So already we've got quite a lot of complexity going on, but all we've really done is make a simple sequence. The first half with 3 things, the second half with 4 things, and then made this transformation like every 3rd repetition, make it twice as fast. Are there any questions at this point? Please shout. Just make sure that I'm live on the chat. Yeah.
Well, there's no question that I can see just yet, but I have some question.
Okay.
So we've seen some really cool performance that you shared, the one with Canute and the others, like the real spirit of the rave and the dancing aspect and the beat. So it's not that much of a question, but like I would like to see that. I'd like to have a feel of what it is to be at an Algorave. Do you think it would be possible to
try
bring
and
that?
Okay, I'll try and make something a bit more ravey. I'm a bit out of practice. Like I haven't actually performed live since November last year, but I'll do my best.
It's like riding a bike.
Yeah, so let's start with some nice electro samples first.
Wow. Oh, that was great. See, it's like riding a bike
Yeah, I felt
with code.
a bit out of practice, but it was nice also not being prepared at all and just sort of seeing where it went. I hope I took some people with me. There's an interesting comment from Ryan actually, Ryan Challoner, who's making some amazing I think it's live coding software now, right? I'm not sure if it always was, but it's definitely live coding software now. It's funny how much this is like describing a visual graph, but in text form. Even though it's text, it's very graph-like. I think that's really perceptive. I think the kind of difference between visual and textual coding is sort of it's like a full dichotomy, really, because text is visual in a lot of ways. Like when you see parenthesis, that is really a branch of a tree. And when you see that dollar, that's really just another form of parenthesis. I've stopped sharing. That's good. So yeah, there's very visual. I think the way that you organize code on the screen is very visual. And I don't really see much difference between coding in something like in Tidal or something like Max or Pure Data. They all involve text, and they're all about connecting things together and plugging one thing into another thing. But it's just in what we call text, it's all about adjacency, right? You put things next to each other in order to give one thing to another thing. Whereas in a graph, you kind of physically draw the line. But that's the only difference, really. There's a lot more naming that goes on in text as well, because you can't just draw that line. So you have to name things in order to connect them together. But yeah, interesting thought. Thanks, Ryan.
So we have a few more comments and a lot of love for your performance. So including from me, this was a really, really good. Oh yes.
I can't do it now. Out of practice, see.
Well, adults should not try to be teenagers. But yeah, I think they got
my age earlier.
they got the message. Yes, they did get your age, even if you still look 12. But so yeah, we have a few questions. I mean, one of them is about the coding environment, because you say that it's an experimental coding environment that you made yourself from scratch, if I'm not mistaken. So I think the question is about its availability and sharing publicly.
Yeah, so it's experimental. It crashes quite a lot. It didn't crash then, which is nice. But it's called Feedforward, and you can find it on my GitHub. And there's some instructions for installing it. And there's a thread on the TidalCycles forum, which is on club.tidalcycles.org, about getting it working. I think it's a bit harder to get working under Windows, if I understand right, but it is possible. So it's completely text mode. I wrote it in Haskell from scratch. It's quite hard sometimes making an open source, like Tidal. I made it just for myself to start with, and put it online, just because that's something you do if you use a lot of free software. It just makes sense to share it. But it kind of I didn't really expect it to become a free open source project, which is what it's become, like with lots of people contributing to it and thousands of people using it around the world. Sometimes it can feel a bit I don't know, you're giving away the software, and it's quite a strange thing to do when the default mode for a lot of people is working with commercial software where you expect support and things. And so it's quite hard emotionally, but sort of being a free open source software developer. And at some point, I just wanted to make something that no one had asked for. And so I made this strange feedforward editor that flashes, gives you visual feedback, and is based, it has the VU meters and things, and is just made completely by myself, and just runs in text. There's no graphical interface. It's just runs in a terminal. But then people were curious and wanted to run it, and now quite a few people are using it, I think. So, but one nice thing about it, I actually originally made it for kids, like for 8-year-olds. I was doing something called the algorithmic drumming circle. I just wanted a really simple editor that had visual feedback to work with them, and we did this algorithmic drumming circle thing where there'd be 8 Raspberry Pis, each with their own speaker and screen, and they'd each be running Feedforward, and they'd all be in sync. So they just write patterns in this editor and make music together because they could hear each other's speakers. So it's sort of taking the idea of a drumming circle and making it algorithmic. If you search for algorithmic drumming circle on my blog, you can find more, slub.org. So it was originally made for kids, but also for myself. And yeah, so just meant to be really simple. There's no save function, although every key press is actually saved with the timestamp, so you can replay a performance perfectly, keystroke by keystroke, which is quite nice. Yeah, if you forget, if something happens with the recording, you can just use the text and regenerate the performance. It's quite good. Yeah, so I went on a bit of a rant there, but
no, that's okay. Yeah. I mean, we do. That's perfectly fine. So we have. Well, you are the creator and maintainer of TidalCycles, and it's open source as well, so people can come and contribute. What is the status of this, and what would you like to ask people to come and help do?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, as I say, it's a free open source project. I haven't been that good at organizing it, but it's coming together now. I mean, one thing is it's not that well documented, so improving the documentation is a big one. Although someone at the moment is reworking the website, which is exciting. So soon we'll have a new website with improved documentation. Another thing is the installation process is really difficult, and if it goes wrong, then it can be quite hard to work out what's wrong if you're not familiar with command lines, especially. You can be in the dark. And we really do have this really nice community of people helping each other get it installed, but it would just be nice if people could improve the installation instructions, improve the installation process especially, and Windows, but also Mac. That'd be great. But actually, I've got someone has what's his name? I think Matthias. I'm really bad with surnames, but Google Summer of Code. Someone's got a Google Summer of Code place to work on Tidal, the API, and make a distributable binary. So we'll hopefully during the summer we'll get closer to the ideal of a drag and drop installer for Tidal, thanks to Google Summer of Code and Summer of Haskell, the Haskell organization. That's pretty exciting.
That's very exciting. I mean, I was a teaching assistant to Melody. Not that I could teach TidalCycles, but I was helping her when she taught the introduction to TidalCycles, and I did notice firsthand that the installation is not straightforward. I mean, it takes some steps to get there. So it would be a huge improvement for sure. And in terms of making it easy for people who don't have as a habit to go through command line to install software, I think it would help probably grow the community and have more people doing live coding. I mean, I think it's pretty inspiring. Seeing you live coding just 5 minutes ago, it's wonderful. I mean, it is just text and characters that you assemble, and then the magic comes together. And although it looks complicated, it's not that complicated because there's not that many characters on the screen. So it's a fantastic platform for experimentation.
Yeah, I guess it might seem a bit alien to people who aren't so familiar with code, but it is really super simple, really. Like as I was saying, I taught 8-year-olds to perform, and I was working with a whole school, and I only had an hour with each group of eight kids. And in that hour, I managed to teach them enough Tidal to make some really interesting rhythms together and record a performance or two with them. So the time to if you can learn enough Tidal to make music with your friends within an hour, I think that shows how simple it is. It really is, and also there's lots to Tidal. There's loads and loads of functions, but in order to perform, I was talking to my friend Lucy Cheeseman, heavy lifting, about this. You only need to know, say, 3 functions, and actually it's good to have creative constraints to make an interesting performance. And what Lucy does is she writes down which functions she's going to use in that performance, maybe 2 or 3 she's going to explore, maybe a new one she hasn't used before to keep things interesting, and a few samples that she's added. And then does these really nice exploratory performances where she's sort of pushing these functions to the limit. So it's just like you need to learn 3 words. It's a bit like learning 3 chords to make punk, as you referred to earlier. It's super simple. I mean, yeah, the
The
results are
complexity.
complex though. That's the nice thing. Simple,
Yeah.
just a few words, but there's, even with 3 words, there's so many ways of combining them together with the operators and things. It's yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, but just looking at just the text that you wrote on that page, but listening to the complexity of the result, there's right there an interesting contrast. You know, like, because to make music that is that complex using any other mean, you would need a lot more real estate. Just
Yeah.
the visual representation itself would be way bigger. So like getting from scratch to that complexity of sound is very inspiring, and
Yeah.
and a lot of the comments on the YouTube channel are coming that way, and thanking you for your contribution, and having an impact in their creative life. I mean, I think I'm translating that probably correctly.
Well, it's nice to see people like Alex and Abane Kapazi, Alexandra Cardenas say that, because they're both really strong community leaders themselves and organise lots of events. So it's great sharing this world with these great people. Yeah, but I was going to say, like, this idea of making patterns is obviously not anything new. And what I've found really important to me is sort of looking for sort of philosophical and cultural basis for coding and live coding that stretches beyond sort of the 50 odd year of computer science and software engineering. And my current research position is investigating the patterns of weaves, for example. And you see the same kind of interaction. I mean, weaving is very different from coding. It's like it's a whole world of complexity, but it has the same idea of these simple elements coming together into incredible complexity. Whether you're working with shaft looms where you're combining different combinations of threads, or whether you're working with color and weave effects where you have these crazy interference patterns appearing. And it's not just visual but structural. And you can come up with patterns that actually end up with more than one textile coming out of the same pattern and things like this. And so it's interesting seeing, really enjoying algorithmic pattern in live coding with Tidal, but then realizing that people have been doing this for millennia, that there's nothing new about this feeling of working with abstractions, because you can see it in the archaeological record. You can find loom parts, rarely find the actual textile, unfortunately. But yeah, people have been playing with these discrete patterns and interferences and structures forever, really. I think that's just what music is about. We don't even, like, even if we don't write it down, which generally we haven't through history, music has been an oral tradition, as you can still see in a lot of parts of the world, like India, where Kapazi is. Yeah, it's passed down through oral tradition, and it's nice thinking about live coding in those terms as well. Like, if you go to a live coding event where there's an Algorave, you can see what's happening, and then the text but it's just there for that moment. But it's in a way, it's a bit like speech. It's this form of expression which is just for sharing for that moment with your friends and the people around you. And it's something you can read and take with you and then explore in your own performances, whether you write it down in a notebook or not. It's yeah, I think it's nice thinking of as code as a sort of form of live expression synonymous with poetry or speech, which amazing artists like I think Kofi Adjuro and interesting seeing spoken word and artists getting involved with live coding, and Yekto is another one, just doing amazing work combining speech and poetry with code. Seems like a natural progression.
Yeah, the pattern, we see a lot of appetite for pattern as a creative tool, and there's different ways of understanding pattern creation and then different way of implementing them depending on what you use. We've had this fantastic workshop with Dom Aversano. We studied Indian music for years, and especially the Carnatic movement. And in the workshop that he gave, he was explaining like the rhythm within the rhythms, the patterns within the patterns, and how you count, and have like this, but potentially gigantic cycle, and within which you have smaller patterns, but recursive in some ways. And there's many different ways that patterns are, inspiring musicians, and also to get out of the 4/4 modes. I suppose this is one of the particularity, I think, that's very rich in TidalCycle, is that you're not constrained by, you have constraints, and as you say, it's good. It's a good thing to have some constraints, but they're very different from the one that we have in other forms of, I suppose, more Western music. I just would love to get a little bit more of insight into the weaving aspect and the patterns, and because that relates, and if you're listening and you're not a native English speakers like me, that might have escaped you that Alex was actually talking about textile, about weaving, patterns with actual thread to make clothing, right, or decorations, tapestries and stuff. So there is patterns there as well, and that's the topic of your research, which somehow you managed to connect to TidalCycles. So as a magician of word that you are, I'd love to get more of how these things are actually interwoven.
Yeah, we can find out more about that. So the project I'm part of is called Penelope, led by an amazing weaver and a mathematician, Ellen Halisius-Gluck. I can show another slide. Hopefully I'll get the right window. No, I haven't. Brilliant.
Oh, and
okay.
We can hear you twice now. I think there's some jack stuff. When you share your screen, we started hearing you twice.
Can you still hear me twice?
No.
Okay. Well, this is going to be interesting. I'll try and
maybe not.
Try again.
Don't share the sound when you share your screen. Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. I'll untick that. Yeah. Okay. Good idea. Right. So that. Okay, I've got the right window this time. So this is one of the interfaces I've made for exploring weaves. So in the sort of middle there, you can see my loom that I've made. It's a bit less shoddy now, but still quite shoddy. But it's got lots of solenoids, so I can select which threads are pulled up or down. And on the left, you can see the visual interface, but it's a live coding interface, similar to Tidal, and as Rowan was saying, it's very graph-like, and you can actually see the graph in this visual interface. You can see there's like 2 cycles, one up, down, and one up, down, and up, and a back-forth instruction. So similar to Tidal, you've got like the basic sequence of up and down, which is the warp going up and down, so the weft can pass through it to create the woven structure. And I've then sort of treating this as binary sequences and anding them together with a logical operator in order to create what you see to the right of the code. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's like a grid with black and white squares in it, and that's what's called a block design, I think. Sometimes called a drawdown, but I think that's in a Schafloom. But anyway, the structure you see here is the structure of the weave on the right. So in the structure looks like kind of almost vines or something. Like you can see there's a repeating structure, but it doesn't look anything like the actual weave that comes out of it. And that's what I find fascinating, and that's what I find fascinating about Tidal as well, is that the code, when you look at it, doesn't really correspond to the textile that comes out of it, even though the textile deterministically follows from the code. They're in completely different domains. Like this grid is like an up-down structure, and that structure is how the threads go up and down over each other, but you don't see it in the result. And that's because the warp threads, which are the horizontal ones, and the weft threads, the warp threads, which are the vertical threads, and the weft threads, which are the horizontal ones, they have their own patterns. So I'm alternating between white and blue. So you end up with this kind of interference pattern between the structure, the pattern of the structure, and the pattern of the threads. And that comes up with this, what I think are legs jumping in the air. But I just love this, the fact that you can be so surprised by what comes out. You can come up with the structure which you think looks nice, so you know there's going to be something interesting about it. But then when you weave it, you do get something interesting, but I mean, at least I, as someone who's not a skilled weaver, I had no idea what it was going to look like, and I was really surprised by seeing these legs jumping in the air, especially as my friend Caroline was with me, who's a clog dancer, so I ended up cutting it out and giving it to her. But do you see what I mean? It's like these different domains, and actually there's 3 different levels. There's the code on the left, which is the words. There's the structure, which is the sort of structure of how the threads interweave, and then there's the visual result, which is influenced by the colors of the threads as well. And working across these domains, I just found so nice. And it's not just the visual results. Sometimes the structural results of the outcome can be really surprising as well. Pockets can form, and all kinds of things can happen.
This is fascinating.
So, yeah. So
thank you for walking us into this, which is somewhat related to the patterns that TidalCycle has, and also a shared interest of yours. So we do have a few questions. Maybe we can go through this before we can let everybody go back to their day. So yeah, there's Moving Flow on YouTube was a question about microtonal tuning support in Tidal, i.e. non-12 equal division of the octave. So more, I suppose.
Yeah, so you said earlier actually that Tidal was based on SuperCollider for its audio. That hasn't always been the case. Originally, I made something in C based on my friend's Adrian Ward's code. But Julian Rohrhuber, who I mentioned earlier, I think, one of the SuperCollider developers and a philosopher and professor in Dusseldorf, made SuperDirt, which is it's based on it. It does run on top of SuperCollider. So actually, I didn't make that part. But SuperCollider is an amazing system, and it has really good support for microtonal music. And also in Tidal, you don't have to put whole numbers for notes. You can put ratios. So you can put play note 4.38 or something. So you're not limited to whole notes in that way. I should say I haven't got any formal musical training, so I'm not. Yeah, I guess the word's semitone, isn't it? But yeah, you can totally explore different microtonal tunings. And if you look in SuperDirt, there's a hacks folder, and I think there's a way of actually patterning which tuning you're using. So just like you can pattern the effects and the notes, you can also pattern what tuning's working. So you could alternate between different tuning methods. So yeah, yes
Okay.
is the answer, really.
Okay. Well, there's one more question on YouTube. I don't know if there's any on Facebook. I didn't see any. But Dalip, and by the way, I'd like to thank Dalip, who's helping us behind the scenes to produce this. And it would have been much worse if he wasn't there. So thank you, Dalip. So a question from Domenico Cipriani. In terms of live coding, in which amount we can have something already prepared, like having synthesizers and sample ready?
Yeah, good question. How live is live? Yeah, I think in general, people start with a synthesizer. It's not always the case. Like people like Shelley Knotts I mentioned earlier actually work directly in SuperCollider most of the time, and will often make synthesizers from scratch. I don't do that myself. I don't do much synthesis at all, actually. I just work with the patterns. That's my area. But some people do like write synthesizers from scratch. I think that's fairly rare. Most people will come with a certain set of samples, although I've been doing things like recently I had a collaboration with my friend Ema O'Donovan. I think that's his surname. Supported by Eclectic in London, so you can find it via their website, where I was working with Ema's voice. I didn't actually use any samples or any synthesis. I just used a live looper made by someone called Thomas Grund that is an extension for SuperDirt. And now I could just take Ema's voice and pattern it, sample bits of it and chop it up into bits and pattern it while they were singing. So there's that kind of thing. In terms of patterns, this really varies. I'd say most people come to a live coding performance with a ready prepared set that they have. So they have a set of code that they've written, and they then manipulate that during the performance to make music. Other people like to go from a blank slate, it's called, where you live code from scratch. This tends to be what I prefer. If I'm trying to, it depends. Like if it's like a really massive festival gig, I might have some prepared code for that. But if it's just for 50 people, I really like the idea that I don't know what's going to happen. But even then, I'll have certain tricks that I have in my back pocket that I know by heart. So even though everything's from scratch, that doesn't mean that it's all improvised. So it really depends, and it's all good. Some people like to put forward the idea that blank slate is purer, and I guess there's some truth to that, but that doesn't mean it's better. I think often the most fun performances have a lot of preparation. Obviously, the more time you put into something, the better. But then there's something really exciting about seeing something improvised. You can kind of see the indecision on the screen as the cursor moves around and someone writes something and deletes it and changes their mind. And the best part of any performance is the crash. Everyone loves that. The kind of when everything breaks. It's not always nice for the performer, but you always get a cheer from the audience. And when it all comes back and sound starts again, that's also a great moment. I think embracing that kind of error is key to live coding culture.
Right. Well, I think that we have exhausted the question coming from the chat. We did have a comment for you. Big hugs from Malitzin Cortes, thanking you for well, he or she. They also thank you for creating an ethical community. And what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to ask Mali about that. So she runs Toplap Mexico and performs as CNDSD. She did an absolutely incredible performance as part of the Alpaca series I did with No Bounds Festival. So you should look that up. Yeah, ethical. I guess as Toplap has grown, it's been interesting to see how it has developed. So Toplap is the temporary organization for programming, live or algorithm programming. And it's grown, it's sort of a worldwide organization with different nodes everywhere. But it's kind of resisted hierarchies. I think that's a big part of the ethics, is not having any central organization that dictates what live coding is or controls who gets to, like Algorave, for example, anyone can put on an Algorave. It's not protected. It's as free as the free software. So I think that's important. I think part of that is promoting diversity of in terms of gender and ethnicity and background, class. I think all these things are important. We're not done so well on some of those in the UK, but always working on it, I think, collectively. And I think that's part of the rejection of hierarchies, because I think the big enemy of diversity is hierarchy. It's all about power, isn't it, at the end of the day? And I think putting forward the human in live coding, so sort of working against narratives around the idea that code is going to replace music or musicians, sort of putting forward the coder as a musician. That, I think that has its own kind of politics around it, about how we should think about what computers are and how we relate to them. But yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what Mali has to say. But yeah, I'll have to ask her later.
Right. Well, it's from the outside of the community. I have always admired how much diverse it was in comparison to the rest of the music industry, which often I mean, it's not often like so some industry leaders say that there's 95% of the people who buy and consume digital equipment for music, such as hardware and software to create music, 95% is male. So like there's a huge divide right there, even though people who go to study music, there's diversity right there after the A levels. You go to study music, and it's an equal footing, but then going to music production, music creation, it becomes skewed, and it's a conscious effort that people need to do, and it's fantastic to see what you've done there, and we definitely want to follow in your footsteps in terms of promoting and showcasing the work that the diverse population does, because that's also by promoting that work that it just creates more resonance with different people who would not otherwise have considered it.
Yeah, but I guess it's really about making space for people, which is sort of the easiest thing to do in a way. So I can't take credit for anything, really. It's just about wanting to put on interesting people and make space for events where people with protected characteristics can explore things together. There's a nice project led by Antonio Roberts called Algo Afro Futures going on, and I'm happy to support that, which is sort of supporting early career Black artists in West Midlands to explore live coding and take it in new directions. And it's really interesting to see what they come up with, because obviously with something like Rave, it's really in the UK, Rave is sort of known as, I mean, the reality might be slightly different, but in terms of legend, it's about these different communities and people of all kind of backgrounds coming together, and sort of cultural norms breaking down and all this kind of thing. In the US, it's a bit different. I think techno and house is all about black political struggle, and so I think it's just feels strange to be working in electronic music when everyone looks the same. When we're drawing on this huge history and also sort of sometimes exploiting music styles and sort of leaving out the people who are behind them. So I think really it's about making space for people to do what they do, and that's it really.
Well, that sounds like a good good example to follow. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and generosity to the community in general and to us tonight. There's some more discussion, but definitely a lot of thanks to you from people who watched. And well, we hope to do a lot more together in the month and years to come. We want to curate more events around TidalCycles, around open source as well in general. Maybe we'll go as far as interactive weaving. Who knows? That could be an interesting creative technology that's being revisited, because I think in the image you showed earlier, there was like an artisan kind of 3D printed weaving machine, or it looked that way from the distance. So definitely a creative tech there that I could absolutely love to support. Any final words, any final music you want to leave on a rave sound?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of yeah. I think that feels like a good place to finish. Really.
Okay,
It's been super.
okay.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and shout out to Melody, who's an amazing artist. You should check out her workshop. And thanks for everyone to contributing, all the musicians and artists who making Tidal and live coding an interesting thing to be part of. And hope to meet you at Algorave or something soon. Yeah, thanks so much, JB and
Right.
Dalit, for making this happen. And yeah, take care.
Thanks.